Hello, 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 America and the rest of the
Morning.
world. It's the American Awakening Squad coming to you. We're so excited to be together again, this great group. Now, you'll notice right off that we're missing the cornerstone, the anchor, the captain, the big toe from Seinfeld terms. That is Marissa Prince, who is driving from Cleveland to Boston with her nieces and nephews in a family rescue plan, which is awesome. Good for her for taking care of others. But, it's going to be hard for us to soldier on without her because she's our leader. We're going to do our best, though. We got a great show. We've got Dan Hazeltine on screen from the beginning. We've got Sandra McCracken coming later. And we are going to start with Josh Jacob, house worship leader, as always, and now in the cool studio there.
Yes. Every once in a while I get to come to my friend's studio and hang out. So thank you, Greg and Amy. I'm going to sing a song by Citizens and Saints. The song is called How Majestic. Mothers come adore his name. Sisters, raise your hand in praise. Lift your hand, taste and see all he's done. Heaven to earth has come. Fathers shout, the victors cry. Brothers feast upon his life. Joy has dawned. Death has been overthrown. Mercy is on his throne. Oh Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Sinners, come behold your King. Sufferers, rise with hope and sing. All is well. Mercies are new this day. Burdens are met with grace. Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. The earth. Our helpless are secure. Our hopeful and our broken. Our thankless and our poor. Our peaceful and our violent. Our fearless, our afraid. All angry, are rejoicing. All doubting, all assured. All joyful and our mourning. Come gaze upon his glory. Come receive his love and mercy. His grace declares how majestic is your name in all the earth. Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
I like it.
So good.
Love it.
But thank you so much. That really kicks my week off to a good start. Really appreciate that, friend. All right, so we got a great show. Notwithstanding the absence of Marissa Prince, I'm only going to mention that one more time that Marissa's not here because it hurts a lot of our hearts, and she's such a stalwart for us. But that means other people get to shine, including my brother Calvin Lee, who's gonna be big here today. Big, and Andrew Hanauer and one of his guests from a church that's part of the One America Network. So more great stuff to come here, and let's get it rolling, or keep it rolling, with Pastor Joel Searby and the Daily Dose.
Hey, everybody. Great to be with you. We do indeed miss our sister Marissa. And if you're out there, we're missing you and hope everything's well. Every day that we meet, we try to bring you guys a little bit of life and light and truth and hope through this little segment we call the Daily Dose. And this week, I want to talk about prayer. We'll be talking about some of the themes from our book as well. But I really felt compelled to talk about prayer this week because I haven't heard prayer coming up a whole lot, honestly, in these really difficult times. It pops up here and there, but not the centrality of prayer, not the real depth and beauty of prayer. And I want to talk about two things, really. One is the way that I have experienced the most effective, deep, meaningful prayer is when it's most honest. And so I want to encourage us this week to pray honest prayers. If God is really God, he can handle all of our emotions, all of our words, all of our anger, all of our joys, all of our frustrations. And so when we pray, we should pray in an honest way and really bring to God the things that are on our hearts. Of course, Jesus gives us a model for that, the model prayer, the Lord's Prayer, as it were. And I like to pray that prayer every day. I start most of my days with that prayer in some form or fashion. I think it's a great way for us, if we're followers of Jesus, to say, okay, he taught us to pray this way, and we should do that. But I also want us to remember that prayer is not just about asking God for things. God is not the cosmic vending machine. God is the sovereign lover of our souls. And so there also should be a great thankfulness and a joy. And my hope and my prayer for you is that as you pray in thanksgiving, as you thank God and find things to be thankful for, that your prayer life will be enlivened. And so that's my encouragement today. Pray with thanksgiving, pray with honesty, and let's see what God does in our lives and in our world when we lean into that. And that's your short Daily Dose today. Back to you, John.
All right, Joel. You know what I'm going to ask as a follow-on question, right?
Here it comes.
Here it comes. So what does that mean, in real world? All right. Yeah. That honesty and gratitude. Okay. Got it. Those are good words.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think honesty, it's crying out. It's letting your anger show before God when you're alone with God. Don't hold back. I think it's really important. And it's cathartic. I mean, even people who are not religious can have a lot of healing by just letting a lot of emotions out, right? And so I think there's help there, even if you're skeptical about prayer, in kind of releasing some of that. And then on the joyful side of things, the same kind of principle, but also I have found my relationship with God deepening when I'm thankful. And also, man, I've seen a lot of answered prayers. I journal my prayers so that I can track them, and even for the most skeptical person, if you read my prayer journal, it would be hard for you to say there's not something going on with a cosmic relationship, because it's pretty remarkable when you do it.
Well, that's good. I appreciate that, and I do believe you. It's just hard, I just always looking to anchor it in the real life we all experience. I will say that both, the social science and the neuroscience is both very favorable on the principles of both expressing aloud lament, sadness, anger, etc. So that's validated, by other sources and other than our faith tradition, as is the idea of gratitude. It's unmistakably the case that we won't go chapter and verse in the science now, but that gratitude is actually something which is key, part of our central wiring to living a flourishing life. So I agree with you in all counts. I just always trying to figure out how to think about it for my own life. So thank you, Joel.
There we go. Thanks, John.
Jeff Bethke's gonna make it all come to life. He's gonna help us figure out what that
Let's
means.
go, Jeff.
Dude, honesty. Plus, he's gonna give us something to chew on too, right, Jeff?
Oh man, no pressure right there. Something to chew on for today. One thing I've been thinking about is how can we make sure that we are kind of keeping ourselves sane, healthy, and flourishing in a digital moment like this. So I'm not talking about trying to escape the moment culturally or whatever, but what I do mean is I think with COVID and then now the cultural moment right now, a lot of us are realizing that, man, it can be very taxing, exhausting, or even harmful on our own kind of human existence to be on our phones as much as we are, to be on social media as much as we are, to be on email as much as we are, to be on Zoom as much as we are. We've talked about this a little bit in the past. Kurt Thompson, some other people have noted the Zoom fatigue problem, etc. One thing I wanted to suggest to you though today is, do you have any type of resistant-like practices that are actually pushing against this kind of inertia of the digital moment? Another way to put it, or another way we think about it that might be a tip you can chew on today, is one thing we do in our family is we call it a digital Sabbath. And so once a week, this might sound like a lot, but it feels actually amazing to us and kind of resets us. Once a week, I'll turn my phone off for an entire 24 hours. Now, me and Alyssa alternate that just in case if there's an emergency or something like that, or someone needs to get a hold of us, they know I'm probably with her, they can call her, and vice versa when she does. And then Andy Crouch has another really good example where he does something similar, I think, but he does like an hour a day a week, and then maybe like a week a year, like, when he gets away to write or something like that. And so my question to you is, do you have any type of digital Sabbath, or at least realize you need it? Because Sabbath is not only in Genesis as this beautiful vision of the rhythm of the universe of work and rest, the 6 days and the 1 day, but then we also see the Sabbath command pop up in Exodus, where God specifically gives it to his covenantal people over and against them as brick makers in Egypt. So he says, okay, you are no longer brick makers, you are children of God. So rest 1 day a week, meaning it was an act of resistance against this false identity that the Egyptian culture was giving them, which never stopped, always work, and then it got worse and worse with no straw, etc. And I think digital Sabbath is very similar, or something that we need, because our phones, our connectivity, our social media, it's giving us a false identity. We're formed into the things we give our attention to. And so it's not a coincidence that we've become more fragmented, more shallow in thought, because our technology is like that. And so that's just something to chew on for today. Do you have any type of practices? Do you have any type of ways of resisting the culture's narrative right now of digital and how it's actually pushing in on us? And so digital Sabbath is one of them. Maybe it's a moment a day. Maybe it's 1 day a week. Whatever it is, I do think we have to have practices to implement that to kind of resist it. So that's something to chew on. Back to you guys.
Yeah, we could talk about that for a week, Jeff. In my book coming out, we talk about that a lot, because the definition of who we are gets so narrow and constrained, and it's such a. I mean, it's like a cultural riptide, right? It's dragging us, pulling us out to sea, and you don't even notice all of a sudden it's gone. It's like you're gone. Your soul is gone. You're lost in the whole thing, because it's just so powerful. It's so all encompassing, and it's such a cultural zeitgeist thing that we stop being aware of it, right? You know, when everybody's sitting in a room, 12 people sitting in a room, and everybody's looking at their phones, not even being communicative with each other when you're all together, and it just seems like the normal, right? But it's not a good normal.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I love that riptide analogy. It's so true. You kind of get pulled out without realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So speaking of which, since I love to hear on the ground Hawaii stuff, is that a thing for you guys there? Or is that like, is it some places have riptides and some places don't? Is that in your neighborhood?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's always this connotation that like every beach is going to have a crazy current or tide, when it's like, yeah, it's very specific to locations. So like we don't really ever go to beaches that have crazy riptides or rip currents, but you can get pulled out, so you got to be careful. So
yep. I
never try to swim back in. You try to follow it, go out, create a loop, and you're good to go.
Is that what you do?
Yeah, you basically kind of go out with it sideways, get out of it, and then come back in like farther down.
Wow.
You know, if you try to fight it, you'll die probably. And there's a spiritual analogy in there somewhere.
Oh, there is. And this is see,
That'll preach.
Joel,
Yeah.
I want to give you, I want to, sort of say to you, that's an example of making it practical, right?
Exactly.
I come up with Southern versions of this, right? Like
You got to bring it home.
go with it and come around. That could be life-giving to somebody here on the
Exactly.
Real
Basically, you have to go the exact opposite way you think you need to go to find life. I can keep going. I can keep preaching. I can keep going,
I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. I'm just kidding with you, Joel. Of course, I know you make it practical with daylilies and all sorts of good Southern agrarian things for us all the time.
Right.
So
Yeah, we don't have surfboards here in North Florida.
no, that's part of the wonderful diversity of this great country.
Amen.
And so, bringing some diversity from around the world of what's happening out there. Some great stories, Kelvin. You're bringing us from Madrid and Atlanta and sad and powerful and all that. So give it to us, friend.
Absolutely. All right. Well, hey, what's going on, everyone? To our friends in the U.S. and all around the world, we say this every time, but we see you guys. We love you. It's so good to be with you. Like every show, just want to bring you a few stories of what is going on out in the world. All right. So heartbreaking. June 12th in Atlanta, Georgia. Rashard Brooks, a 27-year-old black man, was shot by an officer at a Wendy's drive-thru in the city after police moved to handcuff him for suspected driving under the influence, according to videos from the scene. Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard said on Sunday Brooks did not seem to present any kind of threat to anyone, and so the fact that it would escalate to his death just seems unreasonable. The killing has had rapid repercussions in Atlanta, one of the many cities where protesters have called for the end to police violence and racism in the wake of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The officer who shot Brooks was fired, and Police Chief Erica Shields resigned as exasperated protesters have called for justice. On Saturday, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms said she did not believe Brooks' death was a justified use of deadly force. Also, thousands of people filled the streets in Hollywood and West Hollywood on June 14th in a march denouncing racial injustice and supporting LGBTQ rights. A statement of solidarity was painted on Hollywood's best-known street ahead of the solidarity protest. The mural of towering letters spelling out "All Black Lives Matter" in the colors of the rainbow now sits at the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Highland Ave. The event's website states, "The protest is in direct response to racial injustice, systemic racism, and all forms of oppression. The LGBTQ community must extend its support to unite against oppression, police brutality, racism, transphobia, and the many other disparities disproportionately impacting the Black community." And lastly, on June 14th, Real Madrid's Brazilian international Marcelo made his own individual act of solidarity during a match on Sunday. After scoring Real Madrid's third goal, Marcelo celebrated by kneeling and raising his fist. Both actions echoed those of past athletes' protests. While playing for the San Francisco 49ers, former NFL star Colin Kaepernick knelt during the U.S. national anthem to protest police brutality against African Americans. And in 1968, Olympic medal winners John Carlos and Tommy Smith raised their fists on the podium at the Olympic Games in Mexico City during the U.S. national anthem. The gesture has been adopted many times since, and many have raised their fists during the Black Lives Matter protests in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. So, there you have it, a few stories of what is going on out there. And now for our next segment, #LoveYourNeighbor with our friend and partner, Andrew Hanauer.
Thanks, Calvin. Appreciate it. It's I want to introduce a friend of mine and a great partner today, Pastor Joel Rainey, who's the pastor of a church in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. And we've been working on a lot of stuff for the last few years. One of the things we've been working on is bringing people together across religious, racial, political, and geographic divides to work together on the opioid crisis in the Eastern Panhandle, West Virginia, which is continuing to be a significant problem affecting the community and lives and families and children in that area. Through that partnership, I had an incredible experience. I think it was a year ago, in the aftermath of the really horrific Christchurch shooting at the mosque in New Zealand, where just by chance we'd had a plan to have Muslim and Jewish partners of Pastor Joel come to his church to be part of services that day, and this happened to be 2 days or a day after the shooting. And what Pastor Joel did so beautifully that day was he spoke about Islamophobia and the violence that had occurred, but he spoke about it from a theologically Christian perspective, and I think in a way that was really resonant with Christians listening. And so I'm excited to have him join us today, in part to talk about a Christian perspective theologically on what is happening in our country right now on racism, and so forth. And so I'd love to have him speak about that, and also just share more about what his community is doing, or what this moment looks like in his community. So Pastor Joel, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And thanks to John and others for having me on. It's a delight to be with you. There are not too many shows or programs like this that I've been on where the word diversity has been used in the same context as a state like West Virginia. So I'm grateful for that. And that's definitely the epitome of diversity, is that you would have a group like us on. We're delighted to be a part of this discussion. Covenant Church is in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, right across the Potomac River from Maryland, right across the Shenandoah River from Northern Virginia. And so we're atypical to a lot of West Virginia just by the fact that we're heavily influenced by the Metro Washington, D.C. area. A lot of our people commute in and out of that location. And so we're going to be probably more easily touched by a lot of these national issues that happen. And so the present moment for us has been an interesting one. I spoke to this in great detail to our church electronically last Tuesday. I do an Ask Anything session once a week where our people just email in questions. And in this day of COVID, and because there's just not as much happening on campus now because of that, I thought, well, I'll just take the time to get to know some of our people. And one of the questions, of course, comes, a lot of passion is coming out of the murder of George Floyd, out of all of these subsequent discussions around systemic injustice. What's the place of law and order in all of this? And so what I saw it as was an opportunity to be able to speak from Scripture as to what does the Christian faith teach us about law and order? Because typically, I think Christians are like most other people. Our propensity is just to naturally gravitate toward whatever particular position we're most comfortable with. And I don't want that to happen. I feel like our haven is the word of the Lord and the lordship of Christ. And if we can find not only our shelter, but our foundation there, we'll be able to much more articulately address issues like this with the prophetic voice that God intends. And I mentioned that in brief yesterday. I'm thankful, Andrew, as you pointed out, our church has been more than willing to have these kinds of conversations for years now. I did a whole series on systemic injustice, social justice last fall. All that's still on our podcast service and on our website and our various online channels. And we did not really react to these recent events with a lot of flurry. And part of the reason for that was, if you as a congregation have been talking about this and you've been developing those relationships and those contacts, there's no sense for you to be pressured to react. Response and reaction sometimes can be very different things. And if we're reactionary, we can actually contribute greater causticity and toxic polarization to a problem that's already there. And I don't want our congregation to be complicit in that. And so there hasn't been a big forum as of yet. There hasn't been a sermon where I've carved out a whole week to talk about this. But as I told them on Sunday, that doesn't mean we're done talking about it. It just means that I've seen this movie before, and I think most of your viewers have seen this movie before as well, where something happens, injustice happens at the hands of people who are charged with serving and protecting. There's protest followed by violence and lawlessness, and it's like a merry-go-round. And I think there has to be more to how we respond to this than merely preaching a sermon or merely jumping on one or another bandwagon. We have to figure out how to stop the merry-go-round. And I think one of the first things we have to do is admit we don't have the answer. If we did, we would have stopped it by now, and that we need to do a lot of listening. And so as a pastor, I want to listen to my African-American brothers and sisters who are part of our church family. I want to listen to my brothers and sisters who are part of the law enforcement community, who are part of our church family. And I want them to know that they're loved and that they're affirmed and that they're appreciated and valued, first and foremost, as image bearers of God who are objects of the redemptive work of Jesus. And I think through listening, we're probably going to find an answer that we didn't even realize was there. And I think communities of faith are going to be key to this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Can you speak to, obviously the church has a, let's just say, mixed record on race.
Yeah.
Southern Baptist Convention, right, has a mixed record on race.
We were founded on wanting the ability to appoint slave owning missionaries. Yeah. It's kind of hard to hide that. Yeah.
So can you talk about how you see that being addressed within your denomination, but also how, in the plainest terms possible, how you would speak about racism as a Christian?
I'm going to tell you that our history, I think, makes that really difficult. On the one hand, because we have been responsive to the overt racism that founded our denomination. I'm very grateful for that. But I think one of the traps we can fall into, particularly as white evangelicals, is when we define any kind of racism very narrowly. And this is why I think when people talk about systemic racism, we sometimes get this visceral reaction and wall of defense from more conservative and particularly more predominantly white communities, is because we might feel like you're telling us that we're wearing a white hood and we're preparing to burn a cross. And the issue is that those movements have died off, and that's true. But I think part of our narrative is that we've oversimplified this view. And this is going to sound a little cynical, Andrew, but I think I would put it this way. A lot of people's view of race relations in the United States has been, there was this horrible thing called slavery, but Abraham Lincoln ended that, and that fixed a lot. Now, there were still some problems that lasted about 100 years, but there was this guy named Martin Luther King, and he gave a few speeches, and the last racist on earth killed him, and we put that guy in jail, so now everything's okay. And I think we have to resist those kind of simplistic things in order to see that sometimes there are even people of goodwill that might be complicit and not even realize there are systems. And we have seen that need reform. Some of them actually might need complete overhaul. And I know we're having some of those conversations around the country. But the biggest problem, as I see it, for the evangelical church in the West is that it's really easy to look at a dead guy or a dead kingdom like the Confederacy or a dead or dying movement like the KKK and say that's wrong. It's a lot harder to look something that is living and breathing and existing and still a threat, but it's systemic rather than just embodied in a group of people. So it's a little more sinister. It's harder, and it takes more courage to look something like that in its face and say what Jesus said, you are of your father, the devil, and to confront that and to say, for the good of everyone, for our minority brothers and sisters, as well as for those who are charged with serving and protecting. When the system is corrupt, all of those people are placed in danger. And so we just have to do a better job of addressing that at the systemic level.
Joel, that's a really good, compelling word. And, we talk about this a lot on the show because, what what is our problem? And I know what our problem is, it's spiritual darkness, but what is our problem when our whole faith is conditioned on the premise that we are broken, fallen, blind, and diseased, and we need fixing? And then all of a sudden somebody says, well, you need fixing over here. And we're like, no, not there. I mean,
Right.
maybe in concept and in principle, but not that. Why are we so defensive? I mean, it's unanswerable on some level. I think it's rhetorical on some level. Also, there are some reasons, but my gosh, we have a hard time with that.
Well, John, one of my preaching heroes is the late Haddon Robinson, and he used to teach us that the greatest propensity for heresy happens in the sermon at the point of application. So it's not just your belief that Scripture is the Word of God or how you interpret it, but when you go to apply it. And the reason for that is because we don't often want to repent of the things that are applicable that seem obvious to us. And I think what you're talking about is one of those issues. It's one thing for me to say, okay, humanity is wholly corrupt. Doesn't mean that I'm as bad as I can be. Thank God for that. But it does mean that every aspect of who I am as a human being, my mind, my body, my will, everything about me is affected by the fall. And it's just ridiculous to affirm something like that. My tradition refers to that as total depravity, while at the same time denying that human beings whose very nature consists of all that couldn't possibly put systems together that are also corrupt and subject to the fall.
It's amazing. It's amazing that the conflict between those two positions is mind blowing, and yet we play that out, most of us, on some form nearly every day. and to be fair, it's always across racial lines. It's inside families. It's with your spouse. It's the battles between brothers and sisters. I mean, on and on and on. So it's not all hostage to this. But go ahead, Joel. I'm sorry.
John, I know how much you love practical application. So when you're saying all that, I can't help but think of like the things that I get most annoyed with my wife about are the things that I am the worst about. And I think there's like a certain sense in which like we are very often triggered, so to speak, by the things that we actually know but maybe aren't willing to own are actually our own issues. And I know that's true for me. And then I think another thing that we talk about a lot on the show is the ultimate kind of model of Jesus is dying to ourselves. There is that death before life, and nobody wants to die, right? John, you've said that how many times on the show? Nobody wants to die. And so I think that's a big part of what's happening there too.
We do talk about that all the time. And let me just throw one more thing in there, a slightly different angle on the same. A friend to our movement, very dear friend to many of us on the show, Pastor Herman Hamilton out of the Bay Area, did a wonderful sermon on this yesterday. And one of the things he was saying, like, so apart from this idea of you don't have to be defensive, even if it's about you, because that's all part and parcel of the human condition. But there's also this big thing. I mean, 97% of it isn't about you. I mean, or 99, I don't know what the percentage is. I mean, Andrew Hanauer is no more responsible for the KKK as, whatever. I mean, or the sort of the flow downs of that. No, I'm just using Andrew's name randomly, right? Like it could be plug in any one of us. Calvin Lee, coming from a Korean American tradition, is not really responsible for about 99% of what we're talking about. And yet it can be natural for us to be like, get all bristly, our spine gets up, and somehow defending something, even though nobody's really talking about you even exactly, just saying, let me just hear you, man. Let me just, it's not when those discussions are happening, it's not a moment of policy. It's not a moment of, policy, opining. It's not about like optimal structures for the world. It's this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, so you see it that way. All right, well, let me hear it from that perspective, right? It's not all that hard.
That's so good. I have a question for you, Pastor Joel.
Yeah.
And first off, thank you for everything you said. But something that stuck out to me that you said was, how do we stop the cycle? I thought that was a good word, right? And I was wondering how you're talking about there are systems that need to be overhauled, right? But then there also needs to be this overhaul of the soul, which is something that we talk about here a lot, right? Like at its core, there are systems that's broken, but the real problems, we seem to be able to trace them back to here. And so how especially being so close to DC, right? How have you been able to navigate those two spaces, right? Calling for reform, calling for transformation, whether it's in the policy space and in the way it's our leadership or our governance, even law and order, but also kind of pointing people back to, hey, like the real change, real transformation needs to start here.
Yeah, it's a great question, Calvin. I'd say, first of all, with the systemic change, you have to start in your own neighborhood. I'm grateful to be as close to DC as I am, but at the same time, that's not usually my first stop. My first stop is Charlestown, which is the county seat for the county where I live in. It should be your local school board. It should be your local police department. And for us, it should be a city like Baltimore, where we're partnering as a church with several other sister churches on some ministries. And I actually have a 2:00 meeting today with a colleague over there. And we're going to talk about some of these very systemic issues that surround the way the Baltimore city government has oftentimes been complicit in injustice. Now, how do you connect that with the heart? I think that's the other question. The way I would do that is to talk to those individuals. I think we all know, the people that sit in my congregation here week after week after week, that the real root problem is sin in the human heart that separates us from God. And the only answer for that is one man who lived a perfect life on our behalf and died as our substitute and rose bodily from the dead. And when we submit to his lordship, that's the beginning point. Problem is, that's not the whole journey, right? So how do you then take that and connect it so that Christianity is not just about just me living the victorious life? That's really more American individualism than it is Christianity. Christianity is about me now living that transformed life in a way that eventually will contribute to the very kind of cosmic redemption that Paul describes for us in Romans chapter 8 and that whole eschatological vision that we see in Revelation chapter 7. That's where I want our people to go. And I think you put that vision in front of them. But Calvin, in a moment like this, what I think we have to do is model one of the things that John just talked about, that when we talk about racism, I don't need to react to that as a white guy as though somebody's always looking at me. What I need to do is look at my neighbor, right? And so I need to learn how to look at my neighbor. And right now I have two groups of neighbors, both of whom are my brothers and sisters who call me pastor, who are suffering. One is obviously the African-American community, and they've been dealing with this nonsense for hundreds of years. The other is the law enforcement community, who are still having to strap on their badges and guns, but now they're going into an environment that's, because of the system, has now been much more hostile to them as individuals. Do a lot of listening and try to understand. In fact, I would encourage any of our listeners right now, if you know anybody in law enforcement, I suspect the way they're feeling now is the way I felt 2 years ago, when the lid got blown off of a lot of pastors that were abusing their power for sex, for money, any of these kinds of things. And I mean, it just, it started in the Roman Catholic Church. It very quickly made its way almost like a wildfire into the evangelical sector. My denomination lost a lot of once well-respected leaders because of it, and rightly so. If they're going to behave that way, they should answer for what they've done. But in the middle of that, people would want to know what I did for a living. And I would say, well, I'm a pastor. And then they would, look at me with one eye shut. Like, are you one of them? And as a pastor, I understood why they felt that way. But I also at the same time wanted to scream, I'm not that guy. And I think that experience, all of us have those kind of, I think that's something of what our law enforcement brothers and sisters are feeling right now. I haven't yet met anybody, certainly nobody in my church who wears a badge, who saw what happened to George Floyd, or for that matter, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Trayvon Martin. We go on, and would look at me and try to defend it. But they also kind of feel left out of the conversation. So if we can be pastoral by going to every group that feels the weight of this right now, while simultaneously, absolutely, let's work on the systems. Let's make sure. And I think for law enforcement, it's really simple. You treat them honorably, and then you expect honor. And when you have a system that in too many cities doesn't really do either one of those things, then you're going to get what we're seeing. And that just can't be acceptable any longer. But my short answer is, we do a lot of listening. We demonstrate care and concern. we preach more, not less, on individual salvation, because I still believe that, but more on cosmic redemption and the connection between those two, while we're still looking together with the rest of culture for some of the solutions that I really believe are there.
Well, we can go on a very long time on this topic, and we often do on this show. Joel, thank you so much for your insights on this. And we're really grateful for you and Andrew to come on and share this insight from on the ground in West Virginia. Calvin, is there a book that somehow relates to this topic at all? Anything you can think of?
You know, I think I found this on my desk.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was a good looking book. But so, all right, last week we started diving into our upcoming book, American Awakening, 8 Principles to Restore the Soul of America. And so in a new Friday segment called American Awakening in Focus, we'll have guests from around the country joining us to talk through the important themes of each chapter, which we all feel is incredibly poignant for this cultural moment. So the principles featured in the book describe, you know, who we are as individuals, who we're all meant to be together, and how we can actually find the freedom to experience the lives that we really want, the life that is truly life. So, hey, check this out. We invite you to get the book, grab yourself a copy, follow along with us, and join with folks across the world who are ready for an awakening today. You can pre-order the book on Amazon. You can also find it at Walmart. Check it out. Make sure you don't miss any of our Friday episodes as we dive in. And yeah, we hope to see you all there.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Joel. Thank you, Andrew. Let's bring in our friends from Nashville, Dan Hazeltine and Sandra McCracken. Sandra, thank you so much for being patient with us. Really,
glad.
Yeah, really grateful for you waiting as we worked our way through that long conversation. It's we can go on forever on that.
This is great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you guys.
Nice to see you, Sandra. Yeah, it's good to see you. We're here from Nashville, and as always, love the conversations happening. Yeah, there's so much to just unpack. I feel like of all the conversations I've heard so far and been a part of on the show, that one felt like the very tip of the iceberg, barely being able to scratch the surface on that idea. But that was good to be a part of today. So let's dig right in. My musical guest today, Sandra McCracken. Sandra is described, you know, she certainly exists in the folk community, singer-songwriter, also being described as a modern-day hymn writer, which I feel like is so valuable right now. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about that a little bit, just how this the concept of hymns really plays and complements and supplements the work that we're all trying to do in a season of unrest, in a season of upheaval and chaos, as some might call it. Sandra, I first met almost 20 years ago now. She's been making music, probably one of the most prolific writers, as I was going back through to seeing how many records and how many songs she's been working on. Just incredible over the last 20 years. She's just a fantastic writer, incredible artist. So it's great to have you on the show with us, Sandra. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So my first question is usually, how are you holding up? This has been such a powerful and strange season for so many of us as artists, because a lot of, I imagine for you, you would be out on the road touring had it not been for the COVID-19 obstacle. And so has the season, though, a lot of artists have said that it's been very kind of anxiety creating. For others, it's been very prolific. It's been a season of creativity. How has this been for you?
Probably like most people, it's been up and down. There have been moments of to celebrate that you wouldn't have had otherwise, with everybody home and in one place, and then other moments of real frustration trying to push things forward. And then then the guilt over that, because, you know, we've been healthy and I'm so thankful for that. But there's just, I would say probably the word that comes to mind is displacement. Things are displaced that we thought would be one way and they're something else. So whether that's touring or plans, there's a lot to discover and to figure out about all that. So I've been actually in the studio. So it was supposed to be an in-person, you know, recording over 3 days in Nashville in April, and it's ended up being long distance recording with the band in different states. So it's been really fun, but a real challenge.
Yeah, you're having to learn a lot of different kinds of tools that wouldn't necessarily have to be in the back pocket of the artist, right?
Yes.
Figuring stuff out. Well, I would love to. So one of the things I didn't mention, but was that you were a part of kind of a movement, I would call it, early on, that we were both a part of, called the Indelible Grace movement, which was kind of a way of taking a lot of old hymn texts, spiritual texts that had somehow, you know, a lot of gotten trapped in hymnals that no one was looking at anymore, and no one was singing these songs. And so you've been very much a part of this revival of bringing those words out and adapting them for new songs in new ways, new expressions. I feel like you've been one of the most faithful in that endeavor. How has that been?
I loved hymns when I was a little girl, and I remember sitting at the piano when I was just learning how to play the piano, and I just loved the poetry of the hymns and the way that they connect you to something that's larger and older. And, you know, we talk in the conversation you all have been having, we just inevitably are going to have these massive blind spots. And I think hymns are a way of pushing back against the things we can't see about our own cultural moment. And so I think they're really valuable now, and they have been, but they feel especially valuable now. So it was great to be part of the Indelible Grace, the songwriting and the recording of those albums over the years. I think it's enriched our community for sure.
Yeah, well, and I feel like even in your own work, though, beyond there now, having kind of spread out, you've taken on a lot of the writing of songs that have that kind of stanza approach to writing, which has just been amazing. And your melodies, we've sung quite a few of them even on our own in our own churches. So thanks for doing that, for being in that conversation. Would you be willing to play us a song, at least one today?
Yeah.
Great. What do you have for us?
Well, should we do a hymn? I'm open to that. If we want.
I think you can play whatever you'd like to play. Don't feel like you have to do a hymn.
All right. Yeah. How about one that kind of fits with the themes? This is one. It's called "Justice Will Roll Down." I haven't played this in a little bit, but it's that passage from Amos, and I think in these times of disorientation and one of the things that songs can help us with is just like a hopeful imagination, like a gospel imagination that reminds us not just Disneyland good news, but good news that that we're moving toward the restoration of all things. So anyway, this is the song about that. It's called "Justice Will Roll Down."
To the house next door, she has been loved much, has so much to give. Mercy is the fragrance salvation and your victory. Justice will roll down, oh, justice will roll down from high upon those mountains where the mighty river sound. It will roll down, it will roll down. Soon, oh soon, when the trumpet sounds, every knee will bend, every heart will pound. There's gonna be a new world where the servant is the king. Oppression will be over and the slave set free. Justice will roll down, oh, justice will roll down from high upon those mountains with a mighty river sound. It will roll down, it will roll down, it will roll down. It will roll down.
Yeah.
Woo!
Brilliant.
Thank you.
What a message, right? Don't
Yeah.
we need that?
Sure
Good
do.
reminder.
Mm.
Wow. So Sandra, let's talk just briefly. I do want to hear a little bit more because you've always been a writer that I've known has been good at looking out and seeing kind of the injustice, the tensions and the sorrows, the laments we have in our world, and pulling those back into songs. And so, I imagine as you're writing these days, there's an awful lot to try to wade through, and especially if you're working on a new project. Now, have you been working on songs that you've already had written, or has this made you want to shift gears at all, or change what you've been doing?
It's funny. The plan for the album about a year ago was a collection of songs that were pushing back against anxiety, and just in general, like, what does it mean to sing comfort over fear, and to try to, I don't know, kind of explore that. So then all of a sudden we find ourselves in this situation where there's a lot of communal anxiety, right? And so, but then it's different than I expected in one sense, because of the slowness of the process, and what we thought would be done one way has been a very different process. So one of the songs that I didn't know, actually, this is funny, was written on the farm in Vermont, bringing us full circle, is a song called Patient Kingdom. And I remember sitting out on the porch and watching the hummingbirds. One of the other guys on this song, Gareth Davies Jones, he had not seen a hummingbird like that because he lives in the UK, and it was just this beautiful scene. And Sarah Dark. So the three of us sat there and wrote this song, Patient Kingdom, and that's ended up being on the album, and it's the album title. And it helps, just this idea that a hummingbird moves really fast, but at the center there's this stillness, and to try to find the stillness in these times when we're kind of in what some have called like the great pause, like we're forced into some stillness that we maybe didn't ask for. So the album has taken a turn in the sense that it's a slower pace, and it's more contemplative than I thought, but still around the idea of fighting our fears with hope.
Well, that seems very appropriate for all of us these days. We can definitely use that. Good. Well, we look forward to hearing some from that. Would you be open to playing us a song? Do you is anything from that project available to us, or do you want to, what else do you want to play?
Let's do that. I have a couple here, little cheat sheets. I was going to kind of see where the conversation went, but there's one that is on the album. It's called "You Are With Me," and then this is I wrote this with Leslie Jordan, and it just kind of fits the themes a little bit, and I'll play it for you.
in this valley. Mountains grow higher and higher, but I can't find you. I keep lifting my eyes, I know you're with me. I hear your voice when you cry, comfort, comfort. Sorrow may last for the night. In the morning, your joy breaks in with the light. I know you're with me. I know you're with me. You were for me. You've been behind me. You go before. You walk beside me through darkest valleys. I know you are with me. You led me here where it's dry, out in the desert. You bring these bones back to life. You put together. You sing a song of delight. I know you're with me. I know with me. You were for me. You've been behind me. You go before. You walk beside me through darkest valleys. I know you are with me. You will be praised. I will, oh, I will wait. You will be praised. I will, oh, I will wait. I know you're with me. You were for me. You've been behind me. You go before. You walk beside me through darkest valleys. I know you are with me. I know you are with me.
So good. So good.
Thanks, guys.
Wonderful.
We all need that word.
Yeah, definitely. Sandra, it's so fun to have you on. And it's actually really fun because life is sort of happening around you in that space where you are. I love it. We got to see one of your kids. We got to see one of your dogs. We can hear the birds and all of that. It's so wonderful. I love it. It's such a good picture of what life looks like for so many of us right now. So it's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Sandra. When do we have the opportunity to hear this project? Do you have a sense for when it's going to come out, or?
The first song comes out Friday, and then that one comes out soon after. So I think it comes out October. I should know the date, but yes, very soon.
Good. Well, we'll just everybody go check it out. Look up Sandra on wherever you check out your music and stream or whatever, and definitely find her as an independent artist. Always great to support independent music. So check her out. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being with us, Sandra. I'm going to kick it back to John now, I believe, right?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, Sandra. Always a pleasure to see you, Sandra. Great to have you on. Oh, thank you so much. Great to have you, Dan, and bringing us some of the good from Nashville. We're going to have Marissa back on the next show. We want to thank you, One America, and our partner, Joel Rainey, Ann Howard, for their contributions today. Look forward to you next time, seeing everybody out there. Thank you for being with us today. We've got you in our hearts. We've got you in our prayers. We're so grateful to be part of this project of American Awakening with you, or wherever in the world you are, awakening wherever you are. So thank you for being with us. God be with you, and keep fighting the good fight until the next time.